"Are you okay?" she asked. "I will," I replied. She nodded and returned with the bottle and her filled glass. Sitting down next to me, she refilled my glass and looked at me with her doe eyes. "So, Rick, what do we do?" Surprisingly, when Leslie asked her question, Douglas MacArthur's words to the West Point cadets popped into my head. Duty, honor, country. These three sacred words reverently dictate who you should be, who you can be, who you will be. They are your rallying point to find courage when courage seems to fail, to restore faith when there seems to be no reason to believe, to create hope when hope becomes futile. Not so strange. Thanks to my late switch from aviation to intelligence, I was the only lieutenant colonel among a bunch of ambitious majors at the Command and General Staff College. I worked hard to show them that age and cunning can defeat youth and energy, which meant I had to work really, really hard. When one of our leadership courses was about addressing the troops, I went the extra mile and memorized Doug's entire speech, then smugly began delivering it until the instructor told me to stop. Most of the majors simply repeated the three sacred words duty, honor, country, and were very impressed with my performance. But the instructor pulled me aside after class and scolded me for showing off instead of participating. It took a while to understand what he meant, but eventually it dawned on me that he knew what he was talking about. Hopefully, he managed to get into War College and end up wearing the General's Star, which I gave up in exchange for what ended up being a bowl of lentil stew. Anyway, the last line of MacArthur's quote pretty much summed up my reaction to Marcy's letter, especially the part about when there seems to be no reason to believe. Thanks to what apparently happened while I was in Korea, confirmed in part by our violent encounter in Hawaii, I struggled for many years with my belief in Marcy's fidelity. The letter finally threw me into the abyss. I was almost sure that I was unlikely to be able to regain this faith. I was hoping that I could come up with a plan of retribution. Rick, are you listening? Because of my wandering thoughts, I had no idea what Leslie said after she asked what we would do. However, I knew we wouldn't do anything. I didn't want a long discussion, so I assumed the stern look of a colonel. "Leslie, how long have you and Vincent been married?" This abrupt transition unsettled her. Almost 5 years, Rick." "Why? What does this have to do with?" "Before you two got married, did he say anything about that game you two were playing?" "It's not a game, Rick. He just likes to watch me have sex." Interrogation 101. Don't give them time to finish a thought or prepare the next one. "Do you like it, Leslie? Do you like it too?" She hesitated a little. "Well, of course I like it. Who wouldn't?" I frowned and lowered my voice, increasing the tension. "You didn't answer my previous question, Leslie. Before you got married, did Vincent tell you that he would propose to you to other men?" It hurt her. "Wait, Rick. He's not offering me. Nobody's paying anything." "No, but Vincent gets sexual pleasure from offering you to other guys. Did he talk about this before the wedding?" "Well, not quite." "What do you mean, not really?" "Well, sometimes he talked about sexual fantasies, like threesomes or..." "Fantasies, huh? But he never said he'd watch you have sex with other men he chooses." She shook her head. "And no, but..." "How long after the wedding did he tell you this would be happening?" I don't remember. A few months, maybe. He started showing us adult videos. Then he started talking about..." Finally, tears. She spoke so quietly that I had to lean forward to hear. "It was his idea, not mine. When I said I didn't want it, he got really angry and threatened to kick me out. It really scared me. I didn't know what to do if he did it." Time to be the big friendly neighbor and ward off the old colonel interrogator. "Do you really want to continue this, Leslie? Is this what you wanted from your marriage? What about children? How will they fit into a life like this?" She buried her face in her hands, muffling her words. "No, of course, this is not what I want. But how can I stop this without destroying my marriage? No one else will take me now, not after." She fell silent and sank into a chair. Giving in to my protective instincts, I put my arm around her shoulders and pulled her close. She grabbed my shirt and burst into tears. I gave her a few minutes to cry and trust me, yes. Even as I consoled her, I watched, calculated. Professional habits are hard to break. I spoke in the sweetest voice. I may be so much older than you that I could be your father, Leslie, but I am still a man, and believe me, you can choose any husband and father for your children. You are young, beautiful, smart, funny, everything those qualities that the right man looks for. Yes, you made some bad decisions, but you didn't ruin your life. You can still take control of your life and overcome those bad decisions. Do you want to divorce him? She twisted my shirt in her hands and tried to hide in my chest, the sobs diminishing to sobs. Suddenly, she raised her head, her face flushed with fear. Oh yeah, she enjoyed the thought for a moment, then screamed. No, Vinny will never let me go. He will torture me until I stop trying to leave. He made it clear to me right after we started and told me what would happen if I tried to stop. She shuddered. And I know he'll make sure the whole world knows what I did, so I tried to make the best of it. Vincent wasn't just a pervert, he was a real jerk who loved beating up women. Leave it to me, Leslie. I'm sure I can convince him that it would be to his advantage to give you a divorce without argument or consequences. I could and wanted to make sure that Vinny was the least of her worries. She didn't calm down. Oh, Rick, I know you want to help, but he's young and strong and angry, and, well, I'm sure he'll just laugh at your threats. She sat up and wiped her tears with her fist. It's no use, I have to go with him. I couldn't help but laugh. Dear Leslie, your Vinny has never dealt with anyone like me. I spent almost 30 years in the army and sometimes had to deal with bullies much younger and tougher than he thinks he is. In fact, I think it would be better if I tell him the game is over, not you. She started to object, but I continued. What time will he be home tonight? She was embarrassed. Vince won't be back tonight, or tomorrow night. He's not playing cards, Rick. He's gone to Las Vegas for a couple of days. Usually he wants to watch, but this time he decided to go. To Las Vegas, where he can pay to watch others. Many others. He'll be back the day after tomorrow. This was even better. It gave me time to formulate a plan and prepare to receive Vince properly. I just chuckled to show that I understood. He doesn't know that I know, but Marcy gave him $3,000 for me to entertain you and another $1,000 for him to go away for a while so you could be alone with me. She pressed herself against me again and muffled her words. I'm sorry I lied, but they told me to say so. I should have pretended I didn't know where he was, just tell you he left, like he does sometimes. I was angry that Marcy gave the bastard $4,000 of our money to pay for a few days with Leslie. It showed how little I knew of this woman to whom I had been married for 24 years. The last doubts about divorce disappeared. An unbidden thought came to mind, causing a slight chuckle. Where was Marcy's sense of sisterhood? The money should have gone to Leslie, not that bastard Vince. Leslie lifted her head from my chest, interested in what I found funny about this messy situation. I tried to hide it by lightly deflecting the conversation. Vincent may want to be difficult, so when he comes back, come to me. When he comes back, I'll tell him what he should and shouldn't do. I'll use simple words so he understands exactly. Leslie looked dubious, but simply nodded. She thanked me and kissed me on the cheek before returning to their house. I hope I did the right thing. When I was a young lieutenant, the only whiskey I could afford that even tasted good was Jim Beam. I still drink it, although I can afford Burrell or Blanton. After the first couple of sips, they all taste the same, so why waste the money? After Leslie left, I took a few sips of Mr. Bean, then a few more sips, and then another. I had not had supper, so I soon began to think with growing enthusiasm of how to take revenge on Dr. Dickhead. The next morning, the dawn rose like thunder, not across the bay over China, as Kipling claimed, but right between my ears. This made the blacksmith chorus sound like a lullaby. I needed coffee and managed to put my cup down before rushing to the toilet. I took the first cup to the terrace, hoping the cool morning air would help clear my head. When I replayed yesterday's half-drunk reasoning, I realized that my emotions were shouting over my mind. Sure, Dr. Dickhead was an asshole for sleeping with my wife, but he was also a neurosurgeon who probably saved a lot of lives or at least improved them. He must certainly suffer, but not so much that he can no longer save or heal lives. Why punish people he could help? What about Marcy? After all, she was the one who broke our wedding vows, not him. Judging by her letter, Dr. Dickhead did not try very hard to seduce her. He could ruin our marriage, but only after she threw him in the toilet. She too had to suffer. Betrayal must have consequences. Infidelity is not a mortal sin, it is not even a criminal offense. Any consequences must be consistent with this. I needed retribution, not revenge. Retribution means consequences appropriate to the crime. Revenge satisfies the thirst for punishment, the more the better. The former may offer some closure. Too often the latter comes back to haunt the victim, creating more pain and regret instead of satisfaction. I didn't want to dig two graves. I needed a plan. The second cup triggered my brain, so I went to my office and turned on my laptop. But before I could put my fingers on the keyboard, operational technique training kicked in. I turned it off again, placed a piece of paper on a hard table surface, and sharpened my #2 pencils. No digital traces, no fingerprint traces. The plan will be classified as eyes only, and the only eyes will be mine. The first thing I wrote was the cornerstone of any successful secret plan: plausible deniability. I didn't want any fingerprints or breadcrumbs leading back to me. It would have been more satisfying if Marcy and Dr. Dickhead knew that I was responsible for anything that might happen to them, but I wanted to maintain my image as a betrayed spouse. It was not entirely a secret that I had spent several years involved in intelligence operations, so this precluded any violent action that I might organize in Colombia. But I wanted them to regret as long as possible their treachery. Try as I might, I could not come up with anything that satisfied my desires for both retribution and anonymity. After staring at a piece of paper with the title Plausible Deniability, but otherwise blank for half an hour, I tore it up, burned it in the sink, and went for a run. The park was only a few hundred meters away, and 4 laps around it was a mile. Running usually helps me come up with ways to solve a problem, but this morning my run brought only sweat and hunger. I ran a dozen laps, then went home, wiping my face with my t-shirt. After a quick shower and breakfast, I was no closer to how I was going to handle the 2 cheaters. Okay, I wanted retribution, but I didn't know how to get it. I needed advice, but from whom? It had to be someone who knew me and Marcy. None of our current friends or colleagues qualified. Sharing responsibility is as important to a covert operation as plausible deniability, and I didn't think either of them could resist gossiping. The only person who knew us both, and whose judgment and discretion I trusted, was Deirdre Keel. Yes, that same Deirdre, with her interesting story. I was almost sure she would want to help. I didn't know where she was, but I thought I could find her without too much difficulty. Indeed, all it took was a short call to Sergeant Major Bernard H. Wojciechowski at that temple of military bureaucracy that is the Pentagon. Sergeant Major Wojciechowski is in touch. To what does this secret call from the respected Colonel Weston owe? It's just Rick Weston, skiing. Now there's a big word retired after my name. You know me better than that, sir. You will always be Colonel Weston. They should have become General Weston, of course, but that's another story. Yeah, I know you ski, but secret, where did you get that $5 word? It cost me €0.50 the last time I was in Paris, sir, and I thought it was more appropriate than secret or secret. I had to laugh at how scientific he sounded. Underneath his stern appearance, Wojciechowski was a real soldier, the most rough-hewn. He was also a good friend, as far as the difference in rank allowed. Definitely more appropriate, Sergeant Major. Your judgment shows no signs of aging, yet. He laughed too, and then became serious. That's very kind of you, sir. But I repeat, what is this call due to? Somehow, I don't think this is a discussion about vocabulary. No, as you might have guessed, I need a favor. Name him, Colonel. I owe you tens. Many years ago, Wojciechowski and I found ourselves in complete chaos, where resistance should have been minimal at best. We weren't supposed to be where it happened, so going there we knew the support would be spotty. Damn it, she wasn't unreliable at all. Some plausible uncertainty in action. Wojciechowski took several unexpected shots before I could take out the bad guys. I had to stop the bleeding and carry him a couple of miles to the so-called safe house. Alleged because someone recently burned it to the ground. The logs were still smoking, but the basement was intact and probably provided better shelter than the house itself. It took me 3 days to patch him up with the minimal medical kit we were given to get him ready to travel, and another 3 days to get us out of Dagestan. My post-reconnaissance report was sent back half a dozen times until the higher authorities agreed that I could never sugarcoat such a poorly planned and executed operation. This report almost landed me in court-martial, but miracle of miracles, it caught the attention of some bum on the Joint Chiefs of staff. Part of the consequences was my promotion to lieutenant colonel, but I did not accept it until they agreed to promote Wojciechowski to master sergeant. We always had each other's back. You don't owe me anything, Wojciechowski, but we'll discuss this another time. Right now, I need to find a woman named Deirdre Keel. She was. Oh, I know who Deirdre Keel is, sir. She's still in the service. She's now a major, serving at the embassy. She was sent to language courses in Monterrey to learn French, and is now a senior attaché at NATO headquarters in Brussels. I heard him smile when he said this. It all sounded suspicious. Why does Wojciechowski know so much about Deirdre? His next remark showed why I considered him such a good friend. I have an idea why you are interested, sir. Remember, the intelligence community is just a small town with a very long main street. I've been helping her keep an eye on you ever since you two survived that ambush. Quietly, of course. Wojciechowski instilled confidence in the people who met him, so that when Deirdre asked him about me, she could tell more than just basic information. If so, our history was in good hands. That's all I needed to know. Heck, he might even know what's going on in Colombia, but I didn't want to involve him in it. Thank you, Wojciechowski. We're even now. No way, Colonel. Glad to help, but you're still ahead in this matter. Exactly what I expected to hear. He finished by saying that if he ever contacted me out of the blue, he would include his initials and the breed of the horse. We said goodbye, assuring each other that we would meet again when I was in Washington. I called Marcy that evening, trying to find a time between dinner and Dr. Dickhead. Looks like I caught her just before night classes. What do you need, Rick? The day was long. I was getting ready to go to bed. I bet so. It is not said whose bed it will be in, or whether it will be alone. I bit my tongue. I have a proposal. What if Deirdre Keel recorded a video telling exactly what happened? Would that convince you? Come on, Rick. Of course that CIA bitch will lie to save your skin. She's not a bitch, and she wasn't in the CIA. She was a soldier like me, caught in the same ambush as me, and we were caught up in the same emotional turmoil. Neither of us intended to. Oh, sure, protect her while you lie to me. And you have the nerve to accuse me of cheating. It's time to end this conversation. If she believes this, she is truly mistaken about what she is doing. I had to try to get her to understand this before she hung up. This won't be a one-time incident, Marcy. It will be 6 weeks of close contact while you work and while you're close to him. I wanted to say have sex, but I had to control myself. Please come home while we still have a chance to save our marriage. Our marriage was in the toilet, but I didn't want her to know that. I can't, and you know it, Rick. I have made a commitment to Doctors Without Borders, and I intend to fulfill it. Additionally, you claim that strong emotions justified your infidelity. How do you think we feel every day, conducting operations in primitive conditions under the constant threat of terrorist attacks? Oh, please. Doctors Without Borders has been in Colombia for at least 30 years. They established rudimentary but functional clinics and achieved early reconciliation with the FARC and most other armed groups. The odds of terrorists in Colombia attacking Doctors Without Borders were about the same as the odds of aliens attacking Disneyland. And what about the commitment she made at the altar 24 years ago? I left it all unspoken. She took advantage of the silence to hang up without saying goodbye. Again. Deirdre was a second lieutenant on temporary duty with our intelligence team. How can I contact her? The call seemed too out of place. I wanted to get on the next plane to Brussels, but I needed to stay home until I came up with a workable plan. But I also wanted Deirdre's advice to develop this plan. I fell asleep feeling disappointed that I couldn't break this cycle. The circle broke quite quickly. Deirdre called me late in the morning a day and a half later. Hello, Colonel. Do you remember me? Die, how? What? Wojciechowski. Like Shazam, this one word carries a whole world of unspoken meaning. Of course, Wojciechowski. Who else knew that D and I needed to talk to each other and had the means to do so? Of course, there had to be Wojciechowski. What would we do without him? I paused, but she didn't say anything, just It's good to hear your voice, Di. Wojciechowski said that you are in Brussels. I really need your advice. I would like to meet you. And then the doorbell rang. I really didn't want to interrupt this conversation. I ignored him. Never pay any attention to Jehovah's Witnesses, Rick. Just open the damn door. The doorbell rang again. For a former Army colonel, I can be really slow at times. I threw the phone on the sofa, hurried to the door, and opened it. Sure enough, there stood Dee, dressed in pink and green, with a backpack slung over one shoulder, holding her phone and smiling widely. May I interest you in the online watchtower, sir? She giggled, slipped her phone into her backpack, and opened her arms for a hug. I hugged her and barely managed to keep from crushing her ribs. We walked away from the hug, both not knowing what to do next. Taking advantage of a lesson learned during my 6-month temporary service in London, I offered a cup of tea. She nodded wisely. Capital idea, Colonel. Then she smiled again. Over the years, I forgot how much I missed that smile. We went inside. She put her backpack on the floor in the hallway, took out her phone, and went to the kitchen. I took the kettle out of the pantry, filled it, and set it to boil, and then we sat down at the kitchen table. I was interested in how Wojciechowski persuaded her to come, but she beat me to it. Wojciechowski called me on a closed line yesterday morning, said you wanted to talk about something face-to-face, and asked if I could take time off due to urgency. When I asked him if an hour would be enough, he laughed and said, I applied for emergency leave without specifying a reason or duration. It is unlikely that such an application would have been accepted at all, let alone approved, but it appears that Wojciechowski could have arranged such matters. Never, ever underestimate the power of a sergeant major, especially one who is welcomed into the inner circles of the Pentagon. So what do you need to discuss with me personally, Rick? Or is this discussion for Colonel Weston? No, this is a discussion for Rick, a discussion for breaking up with Marcy with a bias. At that moment, the kettle whistled. Dee waved her hand for me to go make tea. I returned with 2 cups and continued. She went to Colombia for a 6-week cohabitation with a neurosurgeon, using Doctors Without Borders as cover. She wrote to me saying she was going to do that, said I'd have to live with it because you and I. Well, she says that he doesn't believe that we didn't go all the way. The teenage euphemism sounded stupid, but I didn't want to say have sex with her. I wasn't going to tell her the whole dirty story, but when she asked, it all just came out. To save time and emotions, I left the story of how Marcy tried to rat out Leslie in exchange for a favor for later. She didn't seem surprised, which made me wonder how much Wojciechowski knew and how much he told Deirdre. It didn't matter, especially if that was what it took to get her to drop everything and come. They were also 2 of the few people in the world I trusted. I knew there had to be a good reason why I instantly disliked her when we met a few years ago. Yeah, Marcy told me you came by to annoy her by telling her how well you took care of me in Iraq. The smile disappeared, replaced by a mask of rage. This is bullshit, Rick. You know I would never tell anyone what happened between us, especially not your wife. Damn it. I know, Dee, I didn't believe her. Lying like that is another reason why she needs to understand how wrong her decisions were and feel the consequences of her actions. I'm not looking for revenge, but... And I explained their feelings about retribution and revenge. Dee smiled sadly. I don't have your sense of justice or fair play, Rick. I don't want to put an end to it, but I would love to slap her so hard she'll be gone in the middle of next week. She smiled again. But that would be behavior unbecoming of an officer and a lady, right? I'll be content with calling her a bitch and clapping my hands. Which is what she did. I'm fine with that. She really is a bitch. I clapped my hands and we laughed together. It was nice. It was, right? It's time to tell Deirdre why I wanted to talk to her in person. I'm pretty sure this isn't the first time Marcy has cheated. I'm definitely going to divorce her, but I can't think of a way to make her realize how wrong she was, how her bad decisions will haunt her. So I need your help to find a way to make her realize this without incurring the wrath of God. Dee looked doubtful, so I tried to lighten the situation. Easy, right? Hey, if it was easy, I'd do it myself. I tried to smile, but I don't think it worked. She still looked doubtful when I went for a second cup of tea. We spent the next few hours talking about other things, what it was like to serve at the embassy, how she liked Brussels, my recent assignments, what it was like to be a retired colonel, and so on. I made us salads for lunch, and then brought the conversation back to my problem, telling Dee about how Marcy had tried to kick Leslie out and how I had handled it. This is incredible, Rick. This whole situation is incredible. How could she imagine that you would accept this? She shook her head in amazement. How could she be married to you for 24 years and not know you? I can't answer that. Obviously, after 24 years of marriage, I didn't know her either. I mean, I never imagined she would do something like that. We were silent for a few minutes, then Dee yawned. I feel like I haven't slept in a couple of days. Can I borrow the bed? I took her backpack and took her to Rhonda's old room. She raised her eyebrows at the blue blanket with the large gold letters USN on it. I shrugged. What can I say? At least she chose a constructive way to rebel against her oppressive father. I told Dee where we were passing the bathroom. Well, yeah, I called it a head, given her circumstances, but her head was already hitting the pillow when I closed the door. I decided it wouldn't hurt for me to take a nap too. I set the alarm for an hour. Dee woke up around 6 p.m. and we decided neither of us wanted to cook, so we went out for pizza and beer. After another beer, when we got home, we each went to our own bedrooms. The day took its toll. I get it up the next morning to find Dee sitting at the kitchen table with a notepad and a cup of coffee. Woke up so damn early in the morning and my body was trying to tell me it was lunchtime. I couldn't fall back to sleep, so I got up and found coffee. I'm glad you have a one-cup coffee maker. I didn't want to have to figure out where everything was. Do you want it, cup? I don't want it, I need it. I'll pour it for myself. Soon I was sitting opposite her with my cup. In fact, this was my second cup. I drank the first quickly. She straightened up and took a deep breath. I have an offer, but I want to make sure it meets your requirements. She sounded like she was briefing her boss before an important meeting. No violence or physical force of any kind, correct? Checked. But you want the consequences to be painful and as permanent as possible. Checked. You don't want her to realize that you don't accept this, that you haven't given her any warning that things are going wrong, that you intend to divorce her. Double check. Okay? My idea is that you write a letter to Doctors Without Borders explaining that your wife and another nurse are using MSF's mission in Colombia as a cover for extramarital affairs. You want MSF to recall these 4 people. If they don't, you will publicly expose their immoral actions and use your influence as a retired US Army colonel to discredit the WBG for indulging in such immoral activities. I shook my head. I don't think a large international organization like WBG would care about what I want. These things probably happen often, and they wouldn't want to be the morality police. You'd be surprised how sensitive they are to public opinion. More than 90% of their budget comes from private donations, and some of those donors don't approve of treason. I could translate the letter into French and send it to my contact at the WBG offices in Brussels. their headquarters apartment in Geneva, but your letter should attract attention immediately. She sounded much more confident than I did about being able to put pressure on the VBG, but I couldn't think of any other ideas. Give me some time to think about it, Dee. It would be great if it worked, but, well, I guess I don't share your confidence. She shrugged. That's the best I could come up with. Let's give it a day or two, and if you can't think of something else, let's try this. The worst that can happen is they say no. We spent the rest of the day walking around the area and having lunch and dinner at a restaurant. We didn't feel like cooking, and it gave us something to do other than sit and talk, which might require discussing the elephant in the room. Dealing with the unhappiness of my marriage, I had no time to think about my feelings for Dee. She, too, seemed preoccupied with solving the disaster of my marriage. I decided not to call Marcy that evening. I didn't want to annoy her so much that she would turn off the phone. Once again, we went to bed early in separate bedrooms. The next day, FedEx delivered a small package while we were having our morning coffee. It contained a flash drive and a short note. This might be a useful box, warm blood. After confirming Wojciechowski's improvised security code, I turned on the laptop. This was helpful, almost half an hour of video of Marcy and Dr. Dickhead having sex. Dee and I actually slammed our fingers during the opening scenes and then cranked through most of it. Dee played the role of critic. Nice chest, but his equipment isn't worth writing home about. I couldn't and didn't argue. I just laughed ruefully at Dee's cynical humor and tried not to think about what I was watching. Sorry, Rick, I know it must have hurt. Shouldn't have been so smart. Don't be, Dee. I'm starting to toughen up, and humor is a good way to help that process. I waved my hand towards the screen, still showing them. I'd really like to kick both of their asses good. We slapped the finger again, then turned off the video. I was pretty sure how Wojciechowski got his evidence and hoped it wouldn't jeopardize my plausible deniability, but it gave Dee's proposal the best chance of success. Identifying the characters in the video as WBG volunteers on a mission in Colombia might actually turn off some donors. It didn't take me long to accept her plan. It took me about an hour to write the letter. Dee suggested a few edits, which I accepted. Final version. Doctors Without Borders. 46 Rue de l'Arbre Bainet. 1050 Brussels, Belgium. To whom it may concern. My wife, Marcella Minerva Weston, is a volunteer surgical nurse on a VBH mission in Colombia. She uses the mission as cover for her affair with neurosurgeon Dr. Trey Cardoza. The attached video shows how they spend most evenings and rare weekends. Her fellow nurse, Penny Washington, does the same to another doctor. I have long supported your humanitarian work, but I cannot accept this attack on my marriage. I don't care if things like this sometimes happen under the stress of MSF missions. I demand the immediate recall of these 4 individuals. I understand that you may be reluctant to agree, but I don't think you will like the consequences if you refuse. I will send copies of these videos identifying them as VBH volunteers to their hospital, every major American medical group, local and national media and religious organizations, all our friends and professional acquaintances, everyone I can think of. I will use all my influence as a retired US Army colonel to discredit WBG for indulging in such marriage-destroying relationships. In addition, I will encourage people to stop donating to WBG and transfer their charitable contributions to other, less destructive groups. It will pain me to take such action against a group that does so much good, but I promise I will if you choose inaction. If you withdraw them, I promise to praise the WBG and encourage people to donate. You must act quickly. If these 4 people remain in Colombia in 3 days, I will begin my campaign. The choice is yours. Sincerely, Colonel Richard M. Weston, US Army, retired. It was probably naive to think that they would pay attention, but it was worth a try. While Dee worked on the translation, I went out and bought a couple dozen flash drives and then spent about an hour copying the video file onto them. I promised not to condemn the WBG if they recalled the traitors, but I did not promise not to send out the video. I was going to expose the traitors at all costs. The only difference was whether I would condemn the VBH as accomplices. D finished translating. I could not verify its accuracy, but I trusted it implicitly. I printed and signed the letter. She soon encrypted it and the video file and emailed it to her contact at VBG, then called and delivered the key verbally. We had a long 3 days of waiting to see how, if at all, they would react. That evening I called Marcy again, a little later this time, hoping to interrupt their fun. It looks like I did. She was extremely annoyed when she answered. "What's this time, Rick? If you continue, I will block your number." "Marcy, your letter made it clear that your attraction to this doctor is not new. The same goes for the time you parked in the hotel lot hours before your work shift while I was away. You are using Leslie as an excuse for betrayal." "Again, Rick, you accuse me of something that you yourself were guilty of many years ago. Wait, you're trying to equate 6 weeks of cheating with my one-time misstep that stopped before full intercourse, not to mention your cheating while I was in Korea and all the meetings with Dr. Dick. Trey before work. Okay, maybe I was looking for satisfaction sometimes. But you were away so often, what could I do? I didn't take vows to become a nun, for God's sake. It was not easy, but I left this last exclamation of hers without comment. It was too absurd for words. Please, Marcy, it's not too late to make things right. A little counseling, maybe a long vacation somewhere nice and quiet. Just come home and we can start over. Our marriage was in the toilet, but I didn't want her to know that. We've been down this path before, Rick. I cannot abandon my obligations to Doctors Without Borders if I want to maintain any reputation. It just won't be professional. We can talk about your suggestions when I get home." And again, she hung up without saying goodbye. I went to bed feeling more disappointed than ever and began to daydream about cuddling with Dee just 2 doors down the hall. Over morning coffee the next day, Dee suggested that Vincent's actions towards Leslie also required consequences. With a decidedly non-militaristic expression, she described these consequences in military terms. Basic retribution must include some amount of corporal punishment, private, not public, and as a still active military partner, I must administer it. She became a little more serious. "He likes to beat up women. Let's see how he likes being beaten up by a woman. Time to use some of those hand-to-hand combat techniques they tried to teach us in charm school." When she finished, she looked gloomy. Dee stood 5'10" and weighed 145 pounds of pure toughness and dirty fighting skills. I was almost sure that Leslin Winnie was in for a tough life lesson. No one deserved this more than him. I agreed with her proposal, but on the condition that I would be there for backup if she was needed. Her gloomy expression turned sour, and I hoped that I would not have to interfere. We did not have to wait 3 whole days for the VBG to respond. 2.5 days later, Marcy, Dr. Dickhead, Penny, and her cheating doctor were back, and none of them were happy campers. They didn't tell anyone they were coming back, but our source told us on a closed line. Dee and I debated whether to tease them at the airport, but plausible deniability required us to remain in the shadows. It's a pity. Ridicule would be such a pleasant feeling, even if it was childish. No wonder Marcy went home with Dr. Dickhead instead of coming to me. She probably suspected that I was somehow involved in their sudden withdrawal, but could not prove it. Our confrontation had to wait until other issues were resolved. It turned out that other questions did not have to wait. Leslie called me around noon that day. "Hello, Rick. Vincent's plane lands at 2:15. Like you said, I said I couldn't pick him up because the car wouldn't start. He got angry and said I should have fixed it, but said he would take a taxi and figure it out himself. I'm worried about what he might do to me. You did everything right, Leslie, and there's nothing to worry about. Like I said, leave Vincent to me. I hope you know what you're doing, Rick. He can be really cruel. Not as cruel as I can be. You don't have to be there when he gets back, so come see me around 2 o'clock. I won't be home, but the door will be open. Come in and make yourself at home. There's soda in the refrigerator and beer. I'll be back later this afternoon." I wish I could be as confident as you sound, Rick, but I'll do as you say. I don't really have a choice. I completely ruined my life with him. You haven't ruined your life. Everything will start to get better from today. Remember, you have friends who won't let you down. I heard her cry quietly as she thanked me and hung up. Dee and I watched the backyard. A little before Leslie came through the gate, we walked out the front door, walked around Nielsen's house, and sat in the living room to wait for Vince. We killed time telling war stories until he showed up about an hour later. He wasn't quite sure what to do with a man and a woman he didn't know in his home. What? Where's Les? She said the car wouldn't start. And what are you doing here, Rick? Who is this woman? Welcome back, Vincent. Had a good time in Vegas. Sit down. I gestured to the chair opposite the couch where Dee and I were sitting. Vincent tried to put on a friendly face. How do you know I was in Vegas? I thought Les was supposed to. He looked at Dee suspiciously. You still haven't told me who this woman is or what she's doing in my house. He was starting to get angry. Oh, sit down and relax, Vincent. We need to talk. This little lady has heard about you and Leslie and wants to know more. He made the wrong assumption about why Dee wanted to know more as I had planned and seemed to relax. Instead of sitting down, he stepped forward with a smug smile and held out his hand for the little lady to shake. Even though I had a rough idea of what was going to happen, I had a hard time following the action, which lasted less than a minute. Dee ignored his hand and hit him so hard that he staggered. Before he could react, she threw left and right punches at him that sounded like rifle shots and probably loosened a few teeth, then put the full force of her body into punching him to the diaphragm. Dee stood there, wildly waving her eyes and gasping for a moment, then knelt next to Vincent's head. Vincent, nod if you hear and understand me. When he didn't answer, she twisted his left ear like a rusty faucet. Do you hear it now? He made something unintelligible. She twisted his ear again, harder. I didn't ask you to say anything, just nod. Understood? He nodded. Good boy. Now, since you're renting this house, there's no reason why you can't just pack up your things and leave, so that's exactly what you'll do. As soon as you can, pack up everything you want to keep in trash bags. They're on the kitchen table. Again, he started to mutter something, but changed his mind. Then take them out to your car. Yes, it works fine, no matter what Leslie said. Then get in the car and drive to another city, preferably another state. And don't come back. Got it. He waited too long to nod. Instead of twisting his ear, Dee punched him between his legs. When he cried out in pain and tried to lift his head, she pushed him down again. Let's take that as a nod. She patted him on the head. This concludes the first lesson. She stood up, nodded towards the back door, and walked out onto the terrace. I followed her and caught her in my arms as she slumped towards me. Oh God, Rick, I'm scared how much I liked what I did to him. I can't believe I'm such a sadist. You're not a sadist, Dee. You were an angel of vengeance. He deserved all of this and more for what he did to Leslie. He may need some time to recover, at least physically. His pride may take longer to recover, but it will take Leslie much longer to recover from years of cruelty and humiliation. We stayed outside for another 10 or 15 minutes before heading back inside. Vincent was able to drag himself to the sofa and lay there in the fetal position. He tried to sit up when he heard us, but gave up the idea with a pitiful groan. Dee went to the kitchen and came back with a stack of garbage bags. She threw them in front of the sofa, ordered Vincent to pack his things, and motioned me into the kitchen. We made coffee and sat at the table, talking as Vincent finally slowly began putting his things into trash bags. As it started to get dark, I called Leslie to reassure her that everything was okay. She said she found herself something to eat, which inspired Dee to offer to buy us something. She returned half an hour later with a bag from Burger King. While we were eating burgers and fries on the terrace, she said that she didn't bring Vincent anything because he would be leaving soon and would be able to buy something for himself. At least on this day, I decided not to contradict Dee. When we finished eating, Vincent finished loading his car and drove away. Dee made a sad face. Oh, he didn't even say goodbye. The adrenaline rush made us both a little drunk, and we thought it was the funniest thing we'd ever heard. Unfortunately, I had a mouthful of beer in my mouth, which I sprayed on my side of the table. After I wiped up the mess with paper towels, I texted Leslie that the coast was clear. We were still laughing when she came through the gate from my house. When we told her what was funny, she took a few minutes to digest the news that he was really gone, and then joined in the laughter until we all had tears in our eyes. The next morning, everyone slept well. Dee and I spent the day relaxing, discussing how long it would take to respond to the video and Marcy's letter and what the reaction might be. We were tired of fast food, so she went to the store and brought ingredients for a salad for late lunch. That day, we took a nap. Separately, of course. It was becoming more and more difficult to avoid continuing the relationship with Dee. She didn't dress provocatively, but it wasn't necessary. I knew all too well what was hidden under the jeans and sweaters she wore most of the time. As far as I understand, she looked amazing. I wanted to run my hands over that beautiful body, but I couldn't while I was still married to Marcy, even if she was a first-rate prostitute. I needed to talk to Dee about my problem. We were drinking tea on the kitchen table after a sumptuous dinner from Panda Express when I finally plucked up the courage. Dee, I thought. I don't know how I was going to finish that sentence, but Dee finished it for me. About why we sleep in separate bedrooms and why we only kissed on the cheek. Is that all? She looked smug. It's really rude to interrupt, Miss Keel, or read minds. Yes, that's all. I've never been accused of being polite, Colonel. Here's my next mind-reading trick. You don't want to give in to your attractions to me because you're still married, even if you're the only one in the marriage to honor it. How do I cope? She looked even more smug, if that was even possible, and her eyes danced with pleasure. I realized at that moment that I not only loved this woman, I was madly in love with her. That's why I love you, Rick. I could probably overcome your insecurities. Men aren't much of a challenge. But I'm not going to do that, precisely because I love you. You have to get through this mess with your honor intact, and me too. I love you too, Dee, more than I knew a few minutes ago. Oh, I've known it almost since we hugged on your porch the day I arrived. We girls can understand that, and it has nothing to do with flashlights in our pockets. But we have a problem because my libido tells me it can kill your libido and I'm out of pads. Suddenly, the sparkle in her eyes disappeared, and they filled with tears that slowly began to form and threatened to spill over. That's why I'm taking a plane to London in. She looked at her watch. 4.5 hours. I have less than an hour to get out of here. I changed trains to Heathrow. I'm going back to the embassy, and you'll finish what needs to be done here. Then we will decide how to spend the rest of our lives. Before I could say anything, she jumped up and ran to her room, shouting over her shoulder. Don't come for me, Rick, please. Don't make this harder than it already is. This is the best, and you know it. She was right, I knew it, but I didn't like it like hell. I heard her packing her things and knew that she would not return before it was time to leave. There will be no time for long, tearful goodbyes, just not 2 quick hugs, and maybe a real kiss. That's exactly what happened 45 minutes later. Dee is gone, leaving a hole that I hope we can fill. I am not used to backing down, so copies of the video and Marcy's letter proposing to Leslie were sent to the hospital, our children, her family, my family, and Penny's husband, Josh. I resisted the fleeting temptation to upload it to a sex site, not only because I would likely lose any legal action that arose, but also because I wasn't looking for revenge. Retribution, on the other hand, came quickly. She soon lost her job, most of our friends, and when he left to look for another job, Dr. Dickhead, who also lost his job. Josh told Penny that he filed for divorce, citing Marcy as the main reason. Her parents reluctantly allowed her to move in with them, but made it clear how disappointed they were. Shortly after she moved, I served her with a divorce summons asking for an equal division of property. We both kept our cars and pension plans, everything else was divided equally. Bank and investment accounts, shared personal property, equity in the house, unless one of us wanted to buy out the others. I had no hidden assets, and I was pretty sure Marcy didn't have any either. We paid off our credit cards every month, so the only debt we had was our mortgage. Clean and tidy, without trying to punish anyone for real or imagined wrongdoing. Children did not have much influence on divorce. Both were largely self-sufficient. The Navy was taking good care of Rhonda, at least for now, who knew if she would decide to continue serving. We set up a college fund for Kyle that paid for his tuition, fees, books, room, and board for 4 years. He could stay with any of us during the summer, and the other would pay half the expenses. I suggested mediation to sort out any disagreements about what to do if he wanted to study for more than 4 years. She knew she had no fight, couldn't afford a lawyer anyway, so she agreed to sign if I would let her come and talk one last time. I invited her to come home for dinner the next night. The conversation turned out to be anticlimactic. We ate some Thai takeout together and then went to the living room. I sat in the rocking chair and she sat at one end of the sofa. At first, it seemed that we could part in a civilized manner. She admitted that she cheated several times during our marriage. I admitted that dared her, and I did everything except the intercourse itself. This is where civilization ends. Marcy just couldn't leave things as they were. I'm not sure I've ever really loved you, Rick. Oh, it was great at first. I loved the idea of marrying you, and we raised 2 wonderful children, but I was never happy with our life. I wanted something. The early fun continued. I needed more. I don't know, excitement, so I decided to look for him. She tried to look thoughtful. I guess it makes me shallow, but that's why all of this happened. I wasn't going to argue about the superficiality, I just wished I had noticed it before we'd spent a couple of decades. No, that's not entirely correct. They weren't completely wasted. In the early years, we both seemed to be head over heels happy, and Rhonda and Kyle were wonderful kids. You could have said something, Marcy. Maybe if you had told me you weren't happy, we could have done something. But I have to agree that you, despite our wedding vows, cheated to find arousal makes it pretty clear that you didn't really love me, at least not the way I loved you. She didn't buy it. Her voice became harsh. Yes, of course, you loved me enough to sleep with that CIA bitch as soon as the opportunity arose. No, I didn't sleep with her, as you so eloquently put it, but we did go too far. She will always use this incident to justify everything she has done, including the cheating incidents before I cheated with Deirdre. It's stupid, but I've felt guilty about this for years, but that doesn't justify the many instances of you being unfaithful, especially the ones before I went to Iraq. You know it, but I don't expect you to admit it. Honesty never wasn't your strong point. This really pissed her off, and everything went downhill. Neither of us was going to give in, the accusations and insults piled up. Finally, she stood up, walked to the front door, and turned around for the last shot. I hope you're happy that you ruined 4 lives, you smug bastard. See you in hell. With these words, she left, slamming the door, closing our conversation and our marriage. I thought about meeting Jim Beam, but decided I'd had enough and made tea instead. As I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, letting my thoughts drift, I began to question my decision to resign. If I had stayed, perhaps I would have been selected to the war college, maybe I would have even become a general and received a star. Of course, leaving the army to save my marriage didn't work out. Marcy and Dr. Dickhead both had difficulty finding work. The Jungle Telegraph ensured that wherever one of them applied a hospital, a clinic, a government medical organization, wherever a detailed dossier of their extracurricular activities in Colombia would quickly appear. Both were on the verge of despair when they both received an invitation to come to the nearest Doctors Without Borders office for an interview. Marcy called him and confirmed that he, too, had received an offer. They were suspicious, but they were close to each other, so Marcy joined him. They interviewed together and quickly received job offers, doing the same thing as before, but for a third of their previous salary, plus food and housing for the first 3 years, since they will spend this entire probationary period at missionary posts where help is most needed. Swallowing their bitterness, they agreed, wondering why this was the only job they were offered. Leslie remained in the city for several months. She was able to get counseling through a shelter for abused women, but her job suffered and she couldn't pay the rent. I offered her our guest room, but she said she had reconciled with her older sister in Iowa and was moving in with her for a while. It turned out that her sister Sherry was a psychiatric nurse. Leslie was diagnosed with PTSD and qualified for SSDI, which allowed Sherry to begin an intensive counseling program. Leslie called me from time to thank me and let me know how she was doing. She seemed to be in good hands. It seemed that the children would survive seeing evidence of their mother's betrayal. Rhonda was MMN-3 on a Virginia-class nuclear submarine based in Guam. Their torpedoes and Tomahawk cruise missiles gave them the tip of the spear, and China made alarming noises about Taiwan and the South China Sea. She didn't see Marcy's video or letter until she returned from her mission, and she called me as soon as she finished watching them. "How are you, Dad? I can't believe what my mother did." "Well, I can believe it was pretty clear, but I don't want to." "I'm fine, Ronnie. It was hard, but I had time to process it. And yes, the evidence was very clear." She fell silent for a moment. When she continued, she spoke more quietly, more emotionally. "It's not the first time she's done this, is it, Dad? One time I overheard you saying something mean to her about when you were in Korea. I don't know for sure, but it doesn't matter now, it's in the past. We're going to get a divorce and go our separate ways. I'm thinking about going back to the army, maybe applying for a place at the war college." Her voice became animated, almost joyful. "This is a great idea. I always wanted to be the daughter of a general. Damn it." We chatted a little, but although I was in Army intelligence with the appropriate clearances, she was reserved in talking about the mission and limited herself to general phrases like the lack of internet and cramped bathrooms, especially showers, every third day. I refrained from describing what it was like on submarines during World War II. We ended the conversation with mutual congratulations and promises to meet when we could. Kyle also called me after he saw the video and letter. I was amazed at how mature he sounded. "That's pretty terrible, Dad. I can't imagine how that makes you feel." He paused, then continued awkwardly. "But I guess I'm not really surprised." "You're not really? Why do you say that?" He sounded awkward. "I suspected for a while that something was going on. Several times when I came home without calling, I heard her talking to someone on the phone. Her tone of voice and what she was saying sounded like she was talking to you. But the first time you were outside mowing the lawn, and the other time you were upstairs sleeping." What a test for my son. "Why didn't you tell me anything, Kyle?" He didn't answer for so long that I thought he had hung up. "I didn't want to talk until there was more evidence, Dad. I could be wrong. Besides, I didn't want to cause problems between you and Mom if I were wrong." I assured him that he had done nothing wrong. After a few more minutes of hesitant talking, he said that he needed to get back to studying for his math and physics exams. We ended the conversation with a more heartfelt "I love yous" than usual. Everyone needs a guardian angel, and I was lucky to have a good one. Wojciechowski not only had many sources of good information, he seemed to be able to read minds. He called me early the next morning. "Good morning, Colonel. Have you already had your coffee?" "It's funny that you ask, Wojciechowski. I just sat down with the first cup." "Good, because I have a proposal that requires a colonel-level assessment. Remember the instructor at the Command and Staff College who scolded you for showing off?" "How can I forget? I always wanted to insert a thank you note into his official business." "You don't need to. He earned a whole bunch of them without your help." He was promoted and assigned as an instructor at the War College, then promoted again and selected for the War College. Now he's a brigadier general here at the Pentagon, doing something related to the needs of the service. Okay, I'm probably biased, but he deserves it. The combination of courage and intelligence is a good combination. I'm glad you think well of him because he has an offer that I don't think you should refuse. The offer was renewal, not return to active service. It appears that my retirement papers were somehow changed to become a commander of a reserve unit, which was disbanded almost immediately. I was given 2 weeks leave and 4 more days of travel, after which a position awaited me in the next class of the War College. I accepted the offer and started checking flight schedules to Brussels. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one. Click to the next one. Click to the next one.